Call is now being recorded.
Welcome to the V2V podcast with Aurelius, episode number 14. With me today is Sass, and we are going to be talking about the big questions. We're going to unravel society and culture and science's biggest dilemmas, and that's what we're going to try to do today, to drop some knowledge on the people. So welcome to the show, Sass.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to have me. Thank you.
It is a great pleasure to have you. So, I mean, there are a number of things. It's a lot to unravel, frankly. Society and culture and science is the biggest question. So,
yeah,
you think we're equipped?
And luckily we have a lot of signs in the movie industry. You know, a lot of heads up.
Right, because they're the ones who know what's really going on.
Indeed.
Well, how could they come up with these concepts if they didn't have some basis in some
reality,
imaginary facts?
Yeah, and
imaginary facts. Is that a thing?
Imaginary facts. It's, you know, what's I guess what we would consider conventional science is it has a lot of restrictions, and I think politics kind of controls it, and they, I guess, disallow what information they don't want out there. And
right.
I would assume that, like most of the sci-fi movies, I mean, they have a bit of truth to them.
Sure, and that becomes in a sense real, even if it's made up. I know for a fact that when Stanley Kubrick was designing and getting ready to film 2001: A Space Odyssey,
yeah,
he had NASA consultants with him who were really kind of unsure about their own designs for the real ships, the real spacesuits. So they took a lot of cues from the filmmaker, which is interesting. Yeah. So it kind of, to use a big word, transmogrified into reality. Like the fictional elements of the movie became the real design for a lot of what NASA was doing, at least as far as aesthetic design elements. So, I mean, there's something to that passing back and forth between fantasy and reality and what's really possible, you know.
Yeah.
Sure. And like the idea of a warp drive, which isn't real, but real scientists are actually working on those concepts because of the imagination of Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek.
They've actually had a lot of this information for a long time. I mean, Paul Dirac, you know, he introduced a lot of these concepts.
Yes.
And these are physicists from over 50 years ago, you know, a century ago. And sure. I feel like society is always at least like 200 years behind on what's really going on as far as current development of technology.
Yeah, I mean, even something as mundane as and ubiquitous as a cell phone today, those existed back in the 50s. They were real. They weren't public, but that technology existed, and microwaves before they were introduced to the public had been around for a long time.
Yeah, and I think Tesla had a lot to do with all of this. I mean, I've heard that I mean, from what I understand and what I've read, we wouldn't have anything of what we have right now if it wasn't for him and his inventions and developments.
Well, certainly. I think that's all totally reasonable. Everything we just said, like, nobody would have any argument with that unless. But if someone does have an argument with that, I would really like mean comments in the comments section if possible. So, I mean, because like you gotta love the haters, and there's nothing more satisfying than getting a thumbs down on a video. It's just actually fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, I'm open-minded to hearing contrary views. You know, even if they're wrong, because it presents one an opportunity to educate and inform others.
Well, right. That's what the scientific method is essentially based on is striving to prove yourself wrong.
Yeah.
Or having your peers point out the defects in your argument, so
that
you don't go forward with something that is false because you missed a step or something like that. So it's one of the few areas in the world that verifying that something is incorrect is actually a positive. So I think we can go on that basis. YouTube or whatever the case is, please show us where we're wrong.
You know what's fascinating about the human psyche? I mean, I find that like a lot of people would, think that what they're doing is great no matter what. And even physicists, they come up with, crazy theories that may be entirely wrong, but they think what they're doing is great. And at least they're modest enough to, hear another person's view out.
Sure.
Whereas most people are very, very narrow-minded, and they're kind of bigots. They don't like anyone with an opposing point of view.
Right. So speaking of opposing points of view,
yeah.
How do I know I exist?
Oh,
that's the first.
With that question, I feel like you just pulled the floor right from underneath me.
Right, I did. The short answer, I guess, really is that I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I exist. Just consider this: with every passing moment, society gets closer to creating intelligent machines, and maybe, depending on how you define it, maybe even conscious machines. And if we can do this, could someone or something else do it too?
Yeah.
If we, right? I mean,
yeah.
So
they can, from what I understand, they can actually recreate a human brain with computer neural networks.
Oh yeah.
So
we're getting closer to designing simulated brains that are exactly the same layout as a quote-unquote real brain, like down to the individual neurons. And
I've even heard they can transfer consciousness already, and which is kind of it's a trip to think about, that they could take your consciousness and put it in something else.
Well, if the network was right and the connections that interlink them were correct, why couldn't you just put information in that would basically kind of learn and go on its own, just as we as babies gather information? Everything's new, right? Like everything we see when we're born is brand new. We've never experienced that before, so we intuit a lot and we inherit all of this information, and somehow we become functional as we develop and get more information inside of us. Things start clicking, or those regular neural pathways fire more often. The ones that become habituated to fire when certain things happen. So we're programmed too. Certainly, it's very interesting. So why not make the case that we're just simulations, and that we can create other beings that are as real as we are, or as alive or as conscious as we are? It's a real question. We just don't know quite yet. And I think the reason we don't know is because so much seems to be possible, especially in recent scientific advancements and discoveries, that we're learning that, we really can create replicants. It's kind of disturbing, actually, but exciting too.
Yeah, it takes away the human aspect of things, and I've seen a lot of intellectualists in computer science that actually wholeheartedly believe that someday we will achieve immortality through science, biology, and computer science.
Right, and there's the other side of that coin, where people are concerned that we will create a being that realizes that it doesn't need us, and will just destroy us.
Well, those are the obvious dangers there. And you know what? I've been looking into cybernetics and brain interface chip technology, and it seems like that cyborg future is inevitable. The scientists of the future will have to be chipped in order to remain relevant, and that's something that's just like they need the cloud to tap into it, to just to get whatever information they need and just download it, instead of spending their entire lives just learning for one specialty. You know what I mean? So sure. I mean, and as we go along, we have so much more and more information that the human is really capable of very little on his own. And without this, I mean, at one point I presume that we'll have so much information to learn in science that there is no way a regular human will be able to cover all that information to have a specialty. They will need to be chipped to download all that information so that they may just go ahead and start looking into research and advancement.
Right, because otherwise that scientist would essentially be irrelevant, because if the AI is uniformly more intelligent than the people, that's where the people progress, so to speak, stops. Like we're all really kind of there, like with computers like Deep Blue and Watson. Watson's a doctor, by the way. Did you know that? I Wikipedia that, and I've noticed a lot that, like, with technology, there are a lot of backlashes, and it takes away from a human's capacity, and it may make them more informed, more capable in other ways, but it actually takes away from their own personal thinking and their own. You get what I'm saying? Like using a calculator. Right.
Yeah.
It's a early kind of, or if you even want to go back further, beads or an abacus, rather than your fingers.
Yeah, and people of 100 years, just 100 years ago, before, people were brainwashed for TV and media and, this current situation we have today, I mean, 100 years ago, the average person was far more educated and capable, a greater writer, you know, a better scholar. I mean, people of the past it seemed like they were capable of more and they did more.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Like the golden age.
It seems to be true. Like reflexively, I seem to like believe that that's true, and I'm not sure why. Like, but
it's the backlash of technology. It's the backlash of technology. I mean, you look at the golden age of physics with all the physicists, and it's just so clear that people back then were a lot more brilliant. And some people argue that, you know, we knew less, and so we had more to discover. But I simply look at their worth personally, and I compare it to people of today, and I've seen a big decline,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah, sure. That kind of leads me to my next question, and because we were talking about so much something, like so much stuff, so much technology, so much advancement. So why is there something rather than nothing?
Matter, the leftover matter of the universe, the 5%, around roughly.
Sure, but to kind of dig into it, I guess in part because nothing is not what you think it is, and then there's the big looming question of the multiverse. But so there's a fundamental question. It's that, and the idea is that there's a German philosopher named Martin Heidegger, and his question was that, or the idea was that a fear of nothing was the defining feature of the human condition, like that we're scared that nothing is some kind of universal default. But then I think, well, why should we presume that nothing is more likely than something? After all, if we can accept that we exist to ask the question, then in a sense we've proved that something exists. It seems like it's a whole lot harder to prove that nothing can exist.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. Yeah, when I think, especially when I think of religion and I think of atheism and the grieving process, you know, and humans, you know, tend to make up things to comfort themselves. But I believe that in doing so, in you know, believing in an afterlife and that people don't die and stuff like that, that you're in some way kind of hindering the grieving process and not accepting that things will someday end.
Right. It's kind of the same reason that we, that society puts so much emphasis on the idea of working. Working seems to be just a way to drive away the idea of death. Like, we must stay busy so that we'll hold back the door of the inevitable end, and therefore nothingness. So we must do everything that we can do while we're here, so that we pretend to forget that this all stops.
Yeah, and you know, physically things will all end eventually. All stars will burn out, and you know, there's going to be the degenerate era in cosmology, and you know, alpha and beta decay. We're talking about physics here, and all matter eventually decays and dies. But as far as energy, from what I understand, energy remains. Now, what that means as far as consciousness goes, that's beyond my scope, and I don't even know if there is a consciousness after life, you know, and I'll be the first to admit it, and I'm honest about it. But That seems to remain. I mean, the energy is still going to be there, but the matter is going to disappear eventually, all of it.
Sure, maybe, but if you look at quantum field theory, which is one of our favorite topics, because it's so well defined in a lot of ways, and but what we found when we look at it, at least like mathematically and experimentally, is that even in the so-called vacuum of space, there's this lively soup of
quantum
particles that, the cosmic foam, these particles and fields that pop seemingly out of nowhere, and then they're gone, and they're back, and they're over here, and they're over there, and they're spinning this way, and they're spinning that way, and it seems like random fluctuation.
Yeah, and from my understanding, that dark energy is pretty much that for the most part.
Right. Maybe that has something to do with the unexplained phenomenon, that period of faster than light inflation in the early universe.
Yeah,
and that is so mind-boggling to think that. Okay, so if the universe seems to be approximately 14 billion years old, how in the world, or how in the universe, can the known universe be 93 billion light years across? Like, we will never, even at the speed of light traveling towards the edge of the universe, we'd never get there because it's beyond. It's beyond
our horizon
that you can never get to.
And
all of this stuff is like long gone too. Like, so much of what we see out in the sky at night doesn't even exist anymore, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and as time progresses, it's going to continue to expand, and the thing is, eventually, we spoke about the degenerate era a little earlier, and that's what that's going to be, when all the galaxies of the universe or multiverse pass out of the horizon, and when we look in the night sky, we don't see anything anymore, and that's eventually going to be a reality, unless there's a big crunch, which physicists actually highly doubt. Hello?
There? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
You said physicists highly doubt, and then it cut off for a second.
I said, that physicists highly doubt that there will be a big crunch. So, from our understanding, the universe is just going to keep expanding, and eventually everything's going to pass out of sight, and that's it.
Right. That's the famous heat death that we like to talk about. When everything in the universe returns to basically absolute zero. There will be no energy left, or the energy is so dispersed and so far flung, like one particle to the next, like light years away from each other.
Yeah.
And so there's no relativity anymore. There's no movement, because movement requires two objects to move relative to the other. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. So that seems so cold, and
it's going to be a long, slow death of the universe, and theoretical physicists they theorize that after that happens for so long, I mean, it's going to be a very, very long time, but after that happens for so long, eventually they believe that another singularity might just pop into existence and expand and create a whole new universe.
Right. And not
it's just recycled.
The many worlds theory too, which says that all of it like the birth and death of the universe, and your life and my life, it's all and death, it's all happening right now, all of the time. Infinite choices, and they all happen. We're just restricted to one point of view. That everything is happening all the time, always.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting too. It's very, difficult to wrap your head around. Even the math doesn't provide a lot of solutions.
The many worlds interpretation.
Yes, it's quite fascinating. That's
yeah, and have you ever heard of the Akashic Records?
I have, but if you'd like to refresh me, that would be great.
Supposedly it's a field beyond our senses, and it's a pool of information, and that enlightened, like a bunch of people in ancient history who have been enlightened have been able to tap into it and just draw information of the future and of everything, and it seems to hold all the information of everything, the past and future, and supposedly even our individual beings are all a part of that field, and every information about everybody is just in that field. And quantum physicists have actually found something that they describe as that field. I forgot what it was called, zero point field or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they found a pool of information in quantum physics, and supposedly it's the Akashic Records, and I need to read up on that a little more, but that to me is kind of fascinating. I mean, that all the information of life that ever was is stored somewhere in some pool of information that's beyond our senses, but yet an enlightened few can actually tap into it and see things. And supposedly that's what Tesla, Thoth, a bunch of historical figures have been able to tap into that field and draw amazing information and relay it back to us. And yeah, I'm actually working on my own theory about consciousness and our dream life, and about I believe that we have a nearest doppelganger that's made out of antimatter, and we're somehow connected to that nearest doppelganger closer than we are to the infinite others, and and I believe that instead of a regular split into a duality, which is the regular multiverse, I believe that reality splits into fours and a quadrality, and that there's a dual multiverse of dual infinities.
Interesting.
And
I want to. I'll post a link down in the show notes regarding some research on the Akashic Records, so that both you and I and our listeners can do their own research and see get a better understanding of what you were talking about there.
Also, check out the 0 point energy field in quantum field theory.
Sure, that's fascinating, and it really is. And it's so there's so much there that sometimes it's hard to get your head around. But I think the last thing that it kind of ties it all up. I think the last big question we're attempting to unravel is that, does our own consciousness create reality?
That's what it seems like. I mean, that's what a lot of people believe, and Einstein had trouble wrapping his head around that. he turned around to a lot of people that he knew and he said, you know, do you really believe the moon isn't there when we're not looking at it? And it seems like that's the case, that our consciousness creates the reality that we're in, and somehow we're living in a holographic reality, and that nothing is really real if we're not there.
Right. It's like,
that's
like the old cliche about whether a tree makes a sound when it falls if no one's there to hear it.
Oh yeah. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it really fall?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess ultimately the question is like, maybe who cares? Because we're so anthropomorphic, and then we make the world so we feel in a lot of cases that the universe was made for us.
Yeah, as empiricists,
like if we weren't here, it wouldn't matter, kind of a situation.
You know, and as empiricists and you know, objective believers in objective truth, you know, to accept that is like a kind of like a bitter pill. You know, it's like all that we know and all that we've you know tried so hard to study and learn. It seems like it doesn't even matter in the end because of that.
Sure. Well, this always seems to lead back to the famous double slit experiment.
Yeah.
Where just by us observing the phenomenon, the light is observed to behave either as a particle or as a wave, depending on the setup. And that photons seem to somehow, in quotes, know. Like
they're aware of the observer.
They're aware that like they're being observed, so they create interference patterns.
You know,
and that's still not understood. Like it's just still not. We can see it. We can see it's happening. It even happens. It even happens on film. Like if you videotape the experiment and you're not in the room, and you go back and look. Oh, yep, there it is. It will change to the past, in a sense. Like,
yeah.
Oh, they're particles. Oh, no, they're waves now.
Yeah, and that's incredible. I mean, I'm kind of speechless when I think about that, and I have a theory that electricity is consciousness, because the neural activity that goes on in our brains, which creates our consciousness, is ultimately electrons,
Right. Yeah.
And it could very well be that electricity is consciousness. And I look at, collective consciousness as like an electric field telling, electrons how to behave, how to spin and behave. And collective consciousness sort of does the same for us socially.
Sure.
And I recognize a lot of patterns when studying science and looking at, the real world and the way things work and the phenomena of emergence, in all its various forms. It's, that's a big one. I can't wait for, scientists to somehow describe that in the form of an equation, the mechanistic functions behind it, and I believe that it's somehow like some type of repetitive wave pattern. That's just my intuitive. That's what my intuition tells me.
Sure. Well, that's all very interesting, and I think we're going to wrap it up, and that hopefully we unraveled some of the tough questions. I don't know if I exist, but I do know that this podcast exists. I want to thank you for being on the V2V podcast with me.
No problem. Thank you for having me, man. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. And I just want to let everybody know that if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up and ring the bell for notifications every time we put something strange or serious or funny or whatever the case is, you'll be informed that yet another weird episode is in store. So, episode 14 in the books. And,
All right. Hell yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Have a good day.
You too.